Hi, Writing for Children students, lesson 20 today. I told you that this week I'd talk a little bit about that book that I have taught in the course before, but I gave it a break this semester. Well, because I switched to doing Taste of Rain, but I used to do in the YA unit, I used to do my book called What World Is Left. And I think I told you that that's a book that's like super important in terms of my life. And that's maybe useful for you to know in terms of thinking about the project, your YA chapter. Okay, so this, I may have said this to you, it's a line I use a lot when I talk about the book. This is the book that I was put on the earth to write, that if I drop dead, which I hope I don't, and I hope none of us do in too big a hurry, I would feel like, okay, you did that book. That was like what my mission was on the planet. So maybe that's already a first question for you to think about, like, what's the story that you most need to tell? And it was that story. And it wasn't, I think it was my ninth book, so I'd already done quite a bit of writing before. It was also my first historical novel. So one thing I want to talk to you about is secrets. Okay, I think again it may have come up a little bit in class, but most novels for kids, novels for adults, movies, there's usually a secret, like something that you discover about the characters, their past, which is going to explain a lot. And I once discussed that with my editor, Sarah Harvey, and she was saying, yeah, that's the most obvious thing in the world. And I said, don't you ever get tired of every book having a secret uncovered? And she said, no, that's what happens, right? So something for you to think about. Sometimes the secret, like in my case, was right in front of me, and it was literally, when I think about growing up as a kid, it was like across the table from me, or actually next to me, because we all had our spots at the kitchen table. And I sat next to my mom, and I grew up with a secret. And one thing they say about a family secret, and I heard this when I was a young woman, it really struck me as well. That's so true, that the kids know there's a secret. So keeping a secret, they may not know the details of it, but the awareness that there's a secret is very strong. So it kind of became weirdly a kind of mission of mine, maybe because of the kind of personality that I have, which is like curious, snoopy, always trying to go where I shouldn't, kind of psychologically. Anyway, I can't help it. I want to go into the murky stuff, So I knew whenever my mom used the word camp, because I know we went to summer camp or day camp, but whenever my mom said the word camp, it was always in a very hushed tone, like camp, right? And I knew it was a bad place, and I knew we couldn't talk about it. I also knew, it's funny because this is coming back to me with the COVID-19, is that my mother could never stand in a line, because of course now if you want to go to the grocery store or the hardware store, whatever, you have to expect to be patient for a lineup. My mom, if we went in the old days, you'd have to go to the bank. There were no bank machines or online banking. If there was a line at the bank, my mom, if I was with her, she'd be like, we can't stay. We never waited in the line. And I think that's because for her, the memory of, everything at the concentration camp, getting food, anything, food, if you can call it food, they had a bowl with soup and a little piece of bread. That's what they survived on for nearly 3 years. So when you, again, that feeling, even if no one ever told me, there was like that sense that something was going on. And my mom was very, very reluctant to tell me the story. And at first, when I started asking questions, she'd always get like a stomach ache or a headache, I guess like kind of psychosomatic, reaction. And of course, you don't want to make someone you love sick, right? So I guess I kind of gave up on asking. But then, and this part gets quite complex, and I'm watching the time, so I think maybe I'll talk about this in a couple of YouTubes, or maybe even more than 2 this week, because I want to take my time to explain stuff to you. So I started teaching about the Holocaust, a humanities course, and then I started learning more about my mother's concentration camp. So maybe what I'll end with today is just telling you a bit about my mom's camp, and then just to reach the point of how I got her to start talking about it. So she wouldn't want to talk about it. I'm reading more, I'm finding out my mother's concentration camp was called Theresienstadt. That was the German name, but it was in what's now the Czech Republic, what was then called Czechoslovakia, 20 minutes outside of Prague. I've been to the camp. And the Czech name was Terezín. There were two names for the camp. And one of the things I discovered, and you could discover it just by Googling in 30 seconds, is, and we didn't have Google when I started, but anyway, there were lots of ways to learn this, was that it was considered the model camp, and I'm going to go like this, model camp. And that's because, for a couple of reasons. One was that they sent the prisoners, the Jews, communists, homosexuals, gypsies was a term, Roma, we can't say gypsies anymore, but they were called in those days gypsies. So the enemies of the Nazis, the people that the Nazis wanted to eliminate, most of them they could just get rid of and nobody would ask questions. So if you went into a little village in Poland that was just a small village called a shtetl, full of Jewish people, everybody knew each other, you could just, it sounds horrible but it's true, you could shoot everybody in the village and bury them in a pit and there'd be nobody to ask questions. But in the larger cities, and especially in a city like Amsterdam where my mom and her family lived, the Jews were extremely assimilated, and people knew my grandfather. So if he disappeared, people would say, what happened to this guy? He was a pretty well-known artist, and that will be something else I'll talk to you about in a later YouTube this week. So it was a place where they sent the Jews that people might ask questions about, and a lot of them came from the cultural community. They were also scientists. I have a story about that. I don't know if there'll be time to tell you about a scientist that my mom had a dealing with at the camp, a famous one. Anyway, and it was also called the model camp, and mainly the model camp, because when the International Red Cross started to ask questions, like what's happening to the prisoners, right? The Nazis' response was, don't worry. We're taking excellent care of these people who are being shipped to concentration camps. We have sent them to Theresienstadt. Come and visit Theresienstadt, and you will see what a wonderful place it is. And what made it like an extra twist of craziness was that they made it like a mock camp. So though my mother was starving, they opened like a cafe so that when the International Red Cross came to visit, they had this mock camp to show them. And that's one of the things I tackled in the book. But first I had to get my mom to remember. Okay, so maybe since we're at 7 minutes, 38 seconds, I think that's where I'll start tomorrow, how I got her to remember. Okay, so, well, I didn't, somebody else did, but whatever, I had a little role to play as well. Okay, so think about family secrets or not, but I hope your work on your chapters is starting to happen, maybe in your heads, maybe actually on paper or on the computer. Use the forum for posting your questions up to 100, did I say up to 100? Was I correct? 100 words of text. I basically don't want to read your whole story, the whole thing before. I'll read chunks of text, and I want you to look at each other's and learn from each other's. Okay? All right. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. I miss you.